Live TV looks polished from home, anchors in control, segments rehearsed, every detail planned, but sometimes the cameras capture chaos instead. In this video, we're uncovering the most horrific moments ever broadcasted where thousands become unwilling witnesses to tragedy. It was April 12, 2016 in Cleveland, Ohio. The noon broadcast at a small local station began like any other weekday. The studio lights bright, the air conditioned, and the newsroom running on its usual tense rhythm. No one imagined that a routine food segment would end in a tragedy that unfolded in seconds. Melissa Harding, 39, had worked at the station for 6 years as a midday anchor. She had built her career on projecting authority, but inside the newsroom she was known more for her sharp tone and constant demands than for teamwork. She frequently berated interns and producers over minor issues, often treating her position as a platform for control rather than collaboration. Colleagues recalled her habit of eating during breaks, sometimes even mid-broadcast, and how she scolded staff if snacks were missing from her desk. Her polished on-air presence contrasted with her impatience off-camera, a contradiction that sometimes pushed her into careless behavior. The environment of a live broadcast demands discipline. Anchors must transition seamlessly between stories, follow precise timing, and maintain clear diction under pressure. Any distraction, whether equipment failure, misplaced notes, or food consumption, can disrupt the rhythm of a program. Producers routinely reminded Harding of the risks of eating while cued, particularly during lighter segments. Like many anchors, she assumed her routines were safe. And in a setting where dozens of decisions happened every minute, one overlooked caution could shift events dramatically. That day's lineup featured a short segment promoting a local deli. Harding was irritated about the rushed preparation and snapped at an assistant who brought out a sample plate she deemed poorly presented. Off camera, she ate several bites while waiting for her cue, ignoring reminders to hold off until the live demonstration. Control room staff noted her impatience, but the broadcast proceeded as scheduled. As cameras rolled, she transitioned from a local story into casual banter, having just swallowed a bite when her airway suddenly caught. On live television, the accident began without warning. Mid-sentence, her voice broke into a strained wheeze. Her eyes widened, and she froze, one hand moving to her throat. Viewers saw her knock over a coffee mug as she staggered sideways, panic evident. Her co-anchor reached across the desk, slapping her on the back, but the obstruction remained. Within less than a minute, her legs buckled and she collapsed, toppling her chair with a crash. The control room erupted in chaos. Floor crew rushed onto set, shouting for emergency services as the station abruptly cut to commercial after nearly 20 seconds of live struggle. On the studio floor, producers attempted the Heimlich maneuver multiple times. Witnesses recalled her nails scraping the table as she convulsed, her complexion turning dusky blue. Staff tilted her forward, trying to clear her airway, but the blockage held. Paramedics arrived within minutes using suction and advanced airway equipment. Despite intervention, the obstruction remained sealed. She was transported to a nearby hospital but pronounced dead shortly after arrival. Medical examiners later confirmed a dense piece of deli meat had completely lodged in her trachea, cutting off airflow. Her funeral drew family, but only a handful of co-workers. Many declined to attend, citing grievances over her treatment of colleagues. The service was subdued, reflecting a career marked more by friction than friendship. The station issued a brief statement of condolence and immediately pulled the archived segment from circulation. It was June 18, 2016 in Austin, Texas. The Midsummer Festival was packed with families crowding the streets and local television crews moving between camera points to prepare for the evening broadcast. The night was clear after earlier storms had delayed events, and while the festival looked lively and controlled on screen, behind the stage, rushed work and overlooked safety margins set the conditions for a fatal mistake. Thomas Reed, 28, was a freelance stage rigger hired through a small production company contracted for the broadcast. He had years of experience setting up truss systems, lights, and support lines, but had a reputation for saying yes to last-minute calls, even when conditions weren't ideal. Colleagues knew him as precise, though his willingness to bend to production pressures often left him working without full preparation. Freelancers like him rarely had the luxury of refusing work, especially when tied to high-visibility broadcasts, where networks and sponsors demanded speed over caution. Stage rigging is inherently dangerous. Heavy lighting units suspended overhead, fire cues positioned around tightly packed equipment, and live performers moving close to unsecured hazards. It relies on exact placement and spacing, especially when pyrotechnics are added. Even small errors in distance between mortars and flammable rigging increase the risk of catastrophic failure. That night, Reed had been called in to reposition lines after weather delays compressed the setup schedule. Checks that should have taken an hour were condensed into minutes, leaving little margin for oversight. The segment he worked on was particularly hazardous. A local TV affiliate had scheduled a live fireworks cue as part of the show finale, a risky choice given the proximity to stage equipment. Crew members later admitted the pyrotechnic checks were cut short, with a mortar placed only a few feet from overhead rigging to accommodate the camera's street angle. Festival organizers had already pushed the timing back, and the decision was made to move ahead despite warnings from 2 technicians that spacing was tight. With the crowd already in place and live airtime approaching, the call to proceed was locked in. Eyewitnesses recalled Reed pacing near the edge of the stage, adjusting a line that ran across the truss frame above the fireworks setup. A technician off-frame called ready, and the first shells launched successfully, rising clean into the night. As the second was triggered, it misfired, igniting partially inside the launch tube. Cameras caught the resulting flare and shower of sparks that spread across the lower stage area, where Reed was working just feet from the ignition point. The misfire sent sparks and burning fragments across the platform, scorching nearby rigging and striking equipment. A sound technician later described fragments of casing and burning debris, some large enough to fill a hand, raining down as the truss ignited. Reed was struck by shrapnel in the chest and face and caught in the shower of sparks. His figure was visibly collapsing as others rushed forward. Crew members scrambled through sparks and heat, some calling for emergency, while 2 men pulled Reed's limp body from the hazard zone. His clothing and harness smoked heavily, and his exposed skin was blackened and blistering. He was still breathing when medics arrived, though barely responsive. They secured his airway with intubation and began aggressive fluid resuscitation before transport. Emergency responders administered immediate care before transporting him to a regional hospital. By then, Reed had sustained 3rd-degree burns over much of his torso, blunt trauma from the impact of the fragments, and inhalation injuries. He was pronounced dead the following day after repeated efforts to stabilize him failed. The aftermath played out unevenly. The pyrotechnics vendor was cited and fined, but no charges stuck. The affiliate quietly ended live fireworks segments, though without a public announcement, and city officials pushed new permitting requirements that most festival organizers only reluctantly adopted. For Reed's parents, the investigation meant little. The final report reduced their son to crew member fatally injured, a line item in a binder that marked how the show had gone wrong. It was November 8, 2016, in Nairobi, Kenya. The local news station's Westlands headquarters was packed with guests, contributors, and staff rushing between cameras during election night coverage. The broadcast gave the appearance of controlled energy, but behind the glass doors, poor security planning and an unchecked flow of visitors left the building exposed. Daniel Mwangi, 22, worked as a freelance camera assistant and part-time studio driver. He had been with the station only a few months, running feeds, helping with deliveries, and occasionally assisting with setup. Colleagues described him as reliable and eager, someone who accepted extra tasks without complaint in hopes of landing steadier work. His income was modest, but the job gave him connections in production, and he wanted to prove himself. Friends knew he took risks less out of recklessness than out of a desire to be noticed in a competitive field. Broadcast environments like this rely on layered security, controlled access points, credential checks, and monitoring in lobbies where live guests and volunteers gather. When those measures break down, the open floor plan becomes a liability. Election night added further strain. The station had multiple live feeds running simultaneously, extra chairs and cameras cluttering the atrium, and fewer guards than scheduled because of a staffing error. The lobby became a bottleneck with hurried movement, live mics nearby, and no reliable control over who entered. That night's broadcast was already running tight. Visitors passed through quickly, with reception distracted by constant arrivals. Crew recalled noticing a visibly agitated man outside earlier, arguing with a political contributor. Rather than increase caution, the pace of coverage pushed staff to focus on keeping the program moving. No additional security was brought in. The man later entered the lobby unchecked, shouting as he surged past the desk. Eyewitnesses remembered the sharp crack as glass splintered when the man fired a shot into the ceiling. Panic spread as volunteers ducked behind chairs and producers scrambled toward the stage. The shooter's second discharge hit near the ground, scattering debris. In the middle of the atrium, Daniel, carrying a coil of coax cable, moved with 2 other crew members toward the man in a split-second decision to intervene. Daniel lunged in, briefly grabbing the man's arm in an attempt to disrupt him while another crew member tried to force him backward. A violent struggle followed. The shooter twisted free. A muzzle flash briefly illuminated the atrium, and witnesses saw Daniel collapsing. The round struck his torso at close range. Chaos followed, crew pulling back, fire alarms blaring, and guests pressed against walls as staff pulled the injured away from the attacker's reach. Producers stopped the live segment mid-broadcast, cutting abruptly to off-site coverage while alarms echoed in the background. Paramedics arrived within minutes after being called by the staff. They performed chest compressions in the lobby before transporting him. He was admitted in critical condition, but died shortly after from severe internal hemorrhage from a gunshot to the torso. The shooter was restrained by officers outside the building less than 5 minutes later. Daniel's courage left an immediate imprint on his colleagues. Fellow production workers shared stories of his split-second decision to shield others, and a memorial wall was set up at the station with notes, photographs, and equipment he had used. His family took solace in seeing the community recognize his bravery, turning mourning into a narrative of courage and lasting impact. It was August 17, 2017, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. The morning was clear, and inside the downtown television studio, producers hurried to finalize the day's live broadcast. On the schedule was a wildlife education segment featuring a python, an animal considered safe under routine handling but unpredictable in the heat and noise of a studio. Daniel Park, 31, was a volunteer animal technician from a small regional wildlife center. He had spent years working with reptiles in controlled habitats, feeding, cleaning, and assisting with veterinary checks. Only recently had he begun stepping into public demonstrations, encouraged by the center's outreach staff. By temperament, he was mild and methodical, someone who trusted routine over improvisation. His motivation was straightforward: raising awareness to secure more donors for the struggling facility. He was not reckless, but he often bent to requests from hosts and producers to make the animals seem more engaging. Non-venomous pythons, though not dangerous under proper management, are powerful constrictors. Stress factors like heat, lights, and sudden noise increase the chance of defensive tightening. Standard practice requires 2 trained handlers and a controlled environment, but live television often skipped safeguards for timing and simplicity. That morning, Daniel arrived with a secure crate containing a 6-foot python. The animal was healthy but known to grow restless under overstimulation. The segment was squeezed into a tight window. Producers pushed Daniel to have the snake out quickly and even suggested draping it around an anchor. Hesitant but cooperative, he complied, hoping to preserve the center's relationship with the station. The studio was hotter than expected, with lamps and microphones raising the temperature. Several staffers later recalled how rushed it felt. Daniel knelt to guide the python out, speaking calmly but moving faster than usual. The snake coiled onto his arm at first, but its movements grew sharper. Instead of pausing to settle it, Daniel stepped toward the cameras, following the producer's cue. Control room staff noticed his posture stiffen as the snake wrapped higher across his chest. The first sign of trouble was subtle. His arm tensed as he tried to adjust his grip. Within seconds, the python locked in, wrapping firmly around his torso. On air, the host's expression shifted from a forced smile to alarm as Daniel leaned back, pulling at the coils. Witnesses saw his breath shorten. Assistants rushed in, trying to pry the snake loose, but it tightened further with the commotion. One staffer dialed 911. Cameras briefly captured the struggle before control cut to an emergency slate. Daniel remained upright but visibly strained, his face reddening. Moments later, his knees buckled as the snake compressed his chest. A medic on standby for another segment attempted to intervene, and staff used scissors to partially free him, but Daniel had already collapsed from cardiac arrhythmia caused by oxygen deprivation. Paramedics transported him to a nearby hospital, but he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The snake was returned unharmed to the wildlife center, placed back into a controlled habitat. The station suspended live animal features, cutting the segment from archives and halting future broadcasts pending review. At the Wildlife Center, the tragedy prompted an overhaul of outreach. Live demonstrations were limited to pre-recorded segments, with a veterinarian or senior technician mandated for handling. It was September 9, 2018, in San Diego, California. The morning sky was clear but carried unpredictable winds at higher altitude. Crowds gathered along the waterfront for a televised promotional air event. Few realized that timing adjustments and hurried decisions would soon turn a spectacle into disaster. Mark Levin, 39, was a freelance aerial camera operator with more than a decade of broadcast experience. He had built his reputation on reliability, moving between regional affiliates and local sponsors. Known for saying yes to last-minute calls, Mark often accepted assignments with little preparation. Though not reckless, he tended to prioritize getting the shot over double-checking safety margins. The airshow contract had come through at the 11th hour, and he agreed without hesitation, motivated by steady pay and the chance to expand his portfolio. Shooting an airshow required specialized placement. Mark was stationed on a scaffolding lift just outside the crowd line, positioned for a clear angle on formations. He carried a stabilized long lens and headset for live direction. The setup gave him unobstructed sight lines, but minimal protection compared to an enclosed tower. Under normal conditions, the risk of debris was remote but not absent, especially with tight formation flying. His headset linked him to the director's booth, ensuring he tracked formations across the skyline. That day's complication came from shifting winds. Pilots were briefed on shear at certain altitudes, complicating precision timing. Instead of delaying, teams agreed to minor adjustments. One pair, under pressure to stay on schedule for broadcast, committed to flying closer than usual. Safety officers flagged the move as unnecessary, but the show proceeded. Mark, focused on the broadcast line, remained in position despite the narrower margin. As the routine began, ground cameras followed smoke trails curving upward. Mark's feed showed cross maneuvers threading against blue sky, and producers cued his angle for the broadcast. Witnesses later said the formations looked rushed, spacing tighter than typical. Tension built as the teams moved into a weaving pattern, their aircraft converging in split-second timing. At the peak of the maneuver, two planes clipped wings. Viewers watching live saw the sudden spray of fragments and one aircraft spiraling down. The crowd gasped as metal and flames streaked across the sky. From the scaffolding, Mark had the direct line of sight. His camera tracked the uncontrolled tumble until wreckage began breaking apart. A broken strut and fuselage panel separated in mid-air, dropping toward the spectator zone. Falling from several hundred feet, the section slammed into Mark's platform with enough force to buckle its frame. Witnesses described a metallic thunderclap as the impact shook the scaffolding violently, throwing him over the guardrail. Crew nearby shouted for help as he fell, striking the ground hard. On the live feed, the screen cut between the anchor's shocked expression and emergency vehicles rushing onto the field. Medics arrived within moments, but Mark had sustained fatal trauma. He was pronounced dead at the scene, alongside two pilots who perished in the crash. His equipment lay twisted and broken, the lens shattered on the pavement. The station suspended live aerial coverage indefinitely, not just as a procedural step, but as acknowledgement of the risks their crews faced. Staff who witnessed the crash organized internal safety reviews, rewriting procedures for camera placement and platform stability. It was June 17, 2015, in Seattle, Washington. A bright summer morning framed a television studio's outdoor set, where crews rushed to prepare for a segment of a home improvement program. The scene felt routine, but beneath it lay a structural flaw, an error that would not forgive even a moment of wait. Jerry Mills, 45, was a contractor with 2 decades of remodeling experience. He ran a small business serving mostly residential clients and had built a reputation as a no-nonsense worker who finished jobs quickly. Off camera, colleagues described him as brash and sometimes careless, but audiences liked his energy and plain explanations. He had become a regular guest on the program, a way to generate business and remain visible in a crowded market. Promoted as a trusted expert, he thrived on the attention. Construction for television differed from real jobs. Instead of months, he had minutes to show a process. Producers wanted speed, visuals, and minimal dead time. Jerry worked with standard carpentry tools and fasteners, but instead of a house frame, he often demonstrated on temporary stages dressed to look authentic. Time pressures meant corners were cut, but he believed he could handle the risks. For him, exposure outweighed hesitation. That day's segment involved a simulated backyard deck installation. Producers had ordered a raised platform to serve as the demonstration surface. The structure was built quickly by stagehands, not carpenters, and its stability relied on several adjustable jacks beneath the frame. One jack looked stable at first but was not fully seated, creating a weakness that showed only when weight shifted onto the outer corner. No inspection was scheduled, and the problem went unnoticed. The audience sat less than 10 feet away, and there was no second rehearsal. Jerry arrived with his tool belt, ready to demonstrate how a ledger board connected to a wall frame. He stepped to the platform's outer corner, which carried the hidden fault. The host introduced him as cameras rolled, the crowd of about 40 applauding. The atmosphere looked polished and safe, yet the corner under him flexed more than expected. As he hammered the first nails, a sharp crack cut through the air. Witnesses saw the platform shift and sag toward the audience. The sound escalated into a snap, and the corner dropped suddenly. Jerry lost balance, falling forward as the structure collapsed beneath him. The drop was only 3 feet, but he struck his chest against a concrete prop before his head hit another edge. Live cameras caught everything. The anchor's expression freezing, audience members shouting, crew running into frame. Stage assistants rushed to pull a tarp across the scene while others called emergency responders. Jerry still moved, but his breathing was shallow, blood marking the side of his head. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transferred him to Harborview Medical Center. Despite treatment, he was pronounced dead later that evening. The aftermath centered on a wrongful death suit filed by Jerry's family against the network and its contractors. It alleged that the platform had been assembled without inspection, and that safety was sacrificed for production speed. The settlement was undisclosed, but the program soon disappeared from schedules, a quiet acknowledgement of liability without public admission. Thanks for watching. If these stories of planned events with disastrous execution entertained you, click here for more.